I just want to say that those who fought to end affirmative action while saying and doing absolutely nothing regarding legacy, you're lame. You're absolutely lame, and you'll probably always be rejected from something because the reality is you just weren't qualified and you couldn't muster up. In order to improve yourself, you had to make it worse for everyone else.
Hello my viewers, and welcome back to my channel. Subscribe, like, and don't forget to share your thoughts on what you think about today's video. Now, in today's video, we take a look into the heated debate surrounding affirmative action and its surprising aftermath. Now, a recent clip highlights a powerful critique of those who fought to dismantle affirmative action while ignoring other forms of preferential treatment, such as legacy admissions. Now, despite claims that ending affirmative action would benefit Asian Americans, recent data reveals an unexpected twist: a noticeable decline in Asian American enrollment at prestigious universities like Yale. Meanwhile, palm-colored student numbers have increased and other minority groups have seen little change, or rather stayed the same. Now, we'll explore this complex issue, examining how these changes have unfolded and what they mean for the broader discussion on fairness and equality in higher education. So stay tuned as we dissect the impact of these policy shifts and what they reveal about the real stakes in the affirmative action debate. Let's take a look at these videos. I will be right back.
Well. You did all that yapping for what? There was a reason why affirmative action was put into place, but you said that affirmative action discriminates against Asian Americans in the very first class at Yale University after the Supreme Court said that affirmative action was unconstitutional. We saw a decrease in the Asian American population. But you know which group saw an increase? You got it. The white population increased to 46%, and the Asian population decreased from 30% to 24%, while the black population stayed the same. Same with Hispanics, although there was a slight increase. Let this be yet another lesson. Don't go against your own interest. You were willing to be the face and the lapdog for white conservatives who were against affirmative action, and in the end, in this case, it backfired on your racial group, not against black people and Hispanics who you thought were benefiting unfairly and disproportionately. You threw a sledgehammer, and the sledgehammer came right back and hit you in the face.
When Asian Americans are attacking affirmative action and DEI and standing for socioeconomic entitlement to the exclusion of others, especially Black Americans, who paved the way for the civil rights that we have here in the United States, and including lower income, recent arrival, and especially Southeast Asian Americans, I will fight against that all day, every day, because regardless of race, it's what's right. But fortunately for me, multiple polls from multiple sources over multiple years have consistently shown that a majority of Asian Americans across most Asian demographics support affirmative action. So it's looking like the Asian Americans who are attacking affirmative action and DEI are in fact the traitors. And this becomes especially apparent when you look at the organizations that are bringing these Asian American cases against affirmative action. Like Edward Bloom of Students for Fair Admission, who had been attacking affirmative action in higher education for decades to no avail with white plaintiffs, he brought the cases against Harvard and UNC using Asian American plaintiffs. And the Pacific Legal Foundation, which was founded by members of Ronald Reagan's welfare reform team, who brought the lawsuit against Thomas Jefferson High School. And the Manhattan Institute, which filed amicus briefs against affirmative action in the Harvard, UNC, and Thomas Jefferson cases. Now, without infantilizing the Asian Americans who have signed on to be represented by those organizations, they have autonomy, they know what they are doing. But those are not Asian American-led organizations. Those are white-led conservative and libertarian organizations. And if the plaintiffs knew their history, they would be aware that those organizations represent people who only care about Asian Americans insofar as they can use this as a wedge to cause harm to Black Americans. Now contrast that with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, one of several Asian American-led organizations who filed amicus briefs in favor of affirmative action in the Harvard, UNC, and Thomas Jefferson cases. So it's looking like it is the Asian Americans who are attacking affirmative action and DEI, knowing that their actions are causing harm to Black Americans and lower income, recent arrival, and especially Southeast Asian Americans, who are in fact the race traitors.
The college application process can be so overwhelming and so stressful for all types of students and families. But the LA Times had a recent article that just came out describing how Asian American families and students are really feeling overwhelmed and stressed out, especially since the Supreme Court ruling in June that struck down affirmative action in college application and admissions decisions. But who originally brought that lawsuit to the court in the first place? Let's investigate. In the first college application season since the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action, Asian American families are more stressed out than ever about college admissions. As this commenter here said, I wonder why that is. After the affirmative action ruling, Asian Americans ask, what happens next? And to that I say, welcome. Welcome to the stress that we have all been feeling since forever. Because we tried to warn you. We told you this would happen. When you align yourself with certain people and certain factions, thinking that they'll open their arms to you and they'll want you on their campuses and they'll welcome you with open arms. Look, they played you. They did the old rope-a-dope, the okey-doke on you. And you can thank this man right here, Edward Bloom, who helped that young man bring that court case to the Supreme Court to end affirmative action in college admission processes. Edward Bloom, who's famous for his activism against affirmative action, yeah, that Edward Bloom is the reason why y'all are now feeling stressed out post that decision in June. Because Asian American students felt that they were being discriminated against and that Black American kids were taking all the spots on Ivy League campuses. Legacy admissions were the ones taking your spots, not us. However, did you know that there are tons of scholarships that you can apply to? Oh, wait, those are now under attack also. People are now actively trying to get rid of minority and ethnic and diversity scholarships because they discriminate against other types of people. In college admissions, there are no guarantees. 10 AP classes, a stacked resume, dual enrollment, none of that matters. All the money in the world and private college counselors can't compete with someone who's a legacy from an Ivy League school.
Y'all, the ban on affirmative action in higher education is doing what it is meant to do. In case y'all forgot, June of 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to ban affirmative action on race-conscious admissions in higher education. This decision essentially guts all of race-conscious admissions in higher education. So all of college universities have to abide by this, especially the elite institutions, your Browns, your Harvards, your Yales, your MITs, UPenn, all of these elite Ivy League institutions, right, are where this is really going to hit hard. And here we are a little past a year, and now we are seeing the impacts of this decision. So Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also known as MIT, a very elite institution in Boston, released their data of class 2028. Only 5% of the incoming class is Black. This is a significant drop of 13% within the recent years. Also, the Latino students have dropped as well, looking at a roughly 11% of students identify as Latino in the class of 2028. This is a difference from 15% in recent years. Y'all, this is what the affirmative action repeal is meant to do. To keep Black and brown students from accessing elite institutions and top-tier education. This is what it is meant to do. Now, while we are looking at a slump in admissions when it comes to Black and brown students, y'all know what category of students that are not experiencing this? Asian students. There has been an increase of students from 40% to 47% of Asian students being admitted into MIT. And this just goes to show that Asian students are not categorized as underrepresented students. Part of the argument for affirmative action was that Asian students were not being admitted into schools, again, these elite schools, at a rate that Black and Latino students were. And they felt as though they were being discriminated against. Now, look, things are working in their favor. And this is just the beginning, right? MIT is one of the first schools to release their admission data. But just imagine, right, the other schools such as Georgetown, Yale, Harvard, all of these other elite institutions that are going to eventually release their data information on admissions for class of 2028 and how we're going to see the impact and outcomes of the affirmative action repeal decision. Now, you might ask, Tay, why does this matter? We have HBCUs, we have other schools that Black and brown students can choose from. Yes, this is true, but the reality is that higher education is reverting back to what it was originally designed for, and that's for white elites to have access to elite education. This is a problem. And in order for us to ensure that this doesn't happen, we have to vote. We have to be mindful of who we are putting into office, because those individuals are going to put people at the Supreme Court level that are going to make decisions like this that will have lasting impact on society, on our educational landscape, on history. So be mindful. Be cutesy and demure when it comes to voting. Go out there and vote.
Let's yap about how Asian Americans have affirmative action. Guys, I'm running on a broken nail and a Celsius, and I'm so angry. The worst part was that this was just a part of some ploy from a white man. There are three things that are important to talk about in this case. Number one, it's important to understand what affirmative action is. Two, how white supremacy actually pits people of color against each other. And Asian Americans, I'm looking at you and your dumbasses. And the interesting dynamic of Asian Americans with other POC communities, particularly the Black community. So, what's affirmative action? Affirmative action is a policy that came about during the Civil Rights era that sets systematic procedures within federal policy to ensure that historically marginalized groups were given opportunities for advancement and inclusion, particularly within college admissions. What I want everyone watching this to understand is that affirmative action, contrary to popular belief, is not a ticket into college, especially if you are a person of color. It's not. In fact, affirmative action was actually created just to ensure that white legacy kids weren't the only people given opportunities to actually succeed in white society. Because of a lot of Black activists during the Civil Rights era, all people, not just Black people within the United States now actually had a chance of doing well in America. Now, affirmative action was already deeply unpopular because anytime white people have to share something that should be for the rest of us, they get a little bit, It also upset a lot of people from the Asian American community, particularly because of two things. One was because a lot of people grew up under the model minority myth, which was this myth that led a lot of us to believe that we were the exception, that we were, the good minority that just followed through with all of the rules and procedures that white people had already set for us. And the second thing is just the idea of the American dream. A lot of Asian people just happen to be immigrants, not all of us, of course, but it also essentially allowed us to believe that, if we worked hard, we would get it. Obviously, that's not true. I work really hard and all I have is anxiety and depression. The federal ruling for affirmative action starts to collapse when this 18-year-old named John Wang, who has a 1590 SAT score and a very good GPA, gets really butthurt about the fact that he didn't get to a bunch of elitist schools. And he starts talking about this a lot on media, and he basically claims that the reason that he didn't get into these schools is because he's Asian American. Now, I don't think that this is entirely untrue, because I do believe that people of color in general have a harder time getting into more traditional elitist schools. However, the issue that I have with this little twat is that he claimed that African Americans actually have an easier time getting into these schools because of affirmative action. He ends up going to this organization called the Students for Fair Admissions that basically is just this whole thing that's against affirmative action entirely and has been since it was ever created. What happens is that they give him this calculator and basically tell him that with his stats, if he was a Black person, he would have a 95% chance of getting admitted into Harvard. Truly? Where are they finding this calculator, and where can I destroy it? Because that doesn't even make any sense. Case eventually gets picked up by someone named Edward Blum, who is the head of Students for Fair Admissions. Not only is he the head of this dumbass organization, he's also a white Republican litigator who literally has decades worth of experience trying to dismantle everything that happened within the civil rights era because he just hates people of color that much. Particularly, this man has been looking, searching, desperately praying for a reason to dismantle affirmative action. And the funniest thing is that he doesn't even have actual experience as a litigator. He is professionally known as an amateur litigator who just doesn't like people of color and seeing us winning, apparently. Him and his groupies at his little org basically take all of these testimonies from Asian American people like John Wang and create a case against Harvard that he takes all the way to the Supreme Court to essentially argue that affirmative action is actually discriminatory against Asian Americans and the rest of the population. And it's so embarrassing at the fact that Asian Americans were getting used by this white man, and we fell for it. We fell for it so hard because of the internal racism that we have within ourselves. But when I say ourselves, Asian American community, you know which particular one I'm talking about. You know which subset I'm angry at. In June of 2023, the Supreme Court decides to side with Edward Blum and says that affirmative action is actually unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Act of the 14th Amendment. So basically, this little white man, he gets his way simply just because Asian Americans don't know how to use critical thinking when it comes to this and realizing that this actually isn't going to help us out in the long run. Edward Blum dismantles decades of hard work done by black activists to make sure that not only their community, but the rest of us are set to go when it comes to college admissions. Make it a little bit more fair, because it's never going to actually be equal, but at least make it a little bit better. And we fell for it. We fell for it because Asian Americans sometimes were idiots. There was this survey done with Asian Americans in college, and it turns out that an overwhelming majority of us actually support affirmative action and understand why it's important. It's just a small portion of our community that just decides to scream the loudest because they still have it in their head that we are the model minority, that we have to follow through with the American dream. I also feel like it erases a lot of the actual very intense history Asian Americans have with activism within the United States, particularly in conjunction and in gratitude with the black community. Think about Yellow Peril supports black power during the civil rights era.
Now, in first year class since the end of affirmative action, Black and Latino enrollment share remains stable while Asian American decreases. The class of 2028, Yale's first group of students admitted since the Supreme Court ended race-conscious college admissions, saw changes in its shares of Asian American and palm color students compared to last year's class, while Black and Latin enrollment remained largely the same. Now, according to the first-year class profile released by the admissions office, 14% of the class of 2028 identifies as African American, 24% as Asian American, 19% as Hispanic or Latino, 3% as Native American, and 46% as palm color. Now, compared to the class of 2027, admitted in the last race-conscious admission cycle, the class of 2028 saw a 4% increase in the share of palm color students and a 6% decrease in the share of Asian American students. The percentage of both Black or African American students and Native American students remain the same. Yale's report comes as some other colleges have seen drops in Black and Latin enrollment. The share of Hispanic or Latino students increased by 1%, giving the class of 2028 the largest share of Latin students in Yale's history. Now, students who opted not to answer the optional race question in their application were not included in the demographics data, and some students indicated 2 or more races, meaning the percentages do not add up to 100. Yale College's newer students bring with them an extraordinary collection of interests, ambitions, and talents that will enrich their undergraduate learning environment. Dean of Undergraduate Admissions and Financial Aid, Jeremiah Quinlan, wrote in a Yale News press statement. The Yale News story noted that the class of 2028 had the most applications ever from students who identify as members of underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. The news could not confirm whether changes in enrollment demographics for the class of 2028 were directly caused by changes in the post-affirmative action admissions process. Now, Quinlan and Associate Director of Admissions Mark Dunn did not answer further questions about the results before the class profile release. Following the fall of affirmative action, some of Yale's peer colleges such as MIT and Amherst College experienced a steep drop in enrollment from African American and Hispanic or Latino students. Compared to the class of 2027, MIT's newest class saw a decrease in the percentage of Black students, dropping from 15% to 5%. The share of Latin students also dropped to 11% from 16% last year. At Amherst, the percentage of Black students in the class of 2028 dropped to 3% from 11% in the class of 2027. At Tufts University, it dropped from 7.3% to 4.7%. Like Yale, some colleges did not see a drastic decrease in Black students' enrollment this year. At the University of Virginia, Black student enrollment decreased only from 7.9% to 7% this year. At Emory, this share decreased from 12.6% for the class of 2027 to 11.1% for the class of 2028. Now, while Asian American enrollment increased from 40% to 47% at the MIT, the share of Asian American students in Yale's class of 2028 dropped to 24% from 30% the year prior. Yale's share of palm-color students rose from 42% to 46% from the class prior. MIT's class of 2028 saw a small 1% decrease in palm-color students' enrollment. Now, the recent shift in college admissions policies has sparked significant debate, and it's clear that the outcomes haven't aligned with what some advocates of ending affirmative action might have expected. The notion was that removing affirmative action would create a more level playing field, particularly benefiting Asian American students who felt marginalized by the policy. However, the reality has turned out quite differently. Now, Asian American advocates believe that the end of affirmative action would address what they saw as unfair disadvantages in admissions. They anticipated that without affirmative action, their representation would increase. Yet the data from institutions like Yale tell a different story. Now, we've seen a decline in Asian American enrollment alongside a notable increase in palm-color students, while the proportions of Black and Hispanic students have largely remained stable. Now, this outcome underscores a critical lesson about the complexities of affirmative action and its broader implications. The policy was initially implemented to address systemic inequalities and ensure diverse representation in higher education. The backlash against it, fueled by a desire to shift the balance in favor of certain groups, has inadvertently led to a reduction in the very diversity that many hoped to protect. Now, this situation illustrates how policy changes can have unforeseen consequences, especially when driven by a singular perspective. It serves as a reminder that dismantling one system of support without addressing other forms of institutional privilege can lead to a regressive shift rather than progress. For those who push for the end of affirmative action, the unexpected decrease in Asian American enrollment reveals the complex interplay of policies and their impacts on all racial and ethnic groups, ultimately calling for a more nuanced approach to achieving fairness in education. Now, these recent developments in college admissions serve as a stark reminder of the unintended consequences that can arise from complex policy changes. For many Asian Americans who advocated for the end of affirmative action, the goal was to correct what they perceived as an unfair advantage given to other minority groups, particularly Black students. However, the results have shown a troubling reality: a decrease in Asian American enrollment and a rise in the proportion of palm-color students at prestigious institutions. Now, this outcome highlights a crucial lesson: the assumption that ending affirmative action would benefit Asian Americans while targeting what was thought to be an unfair advantage for Black students has backfired. Instead of addressing inequities, the policy change has inadvertently favored palm-color students who have seen their representation increase. The real issue here is not merely about pointing fingers or crying foul after the fact. It's about understanding that the benefits of affirmative action were not exclusively directed towards one group, but were intended to address broader systemic inequities that affect many minority communities. In this case, the attempt to rectify perceived grievances led to a situation where the real beneficiaries turned out to be those who were least impacted by the changes: palm-color students. Now, this serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of looking at policy impacts through a broader lens. The goal should be to address systemic issues comprehensively, rather than pursuing policies that might inadvertently harm the very communities they aim to support. We have finally come to the end of the video, but what do my viewers have to say? Share your thoughts, your views, your contributions as well in the comment section, and let's have a conversation. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video as I bring you another interesting video.